Let's look at some examples of alternative leads. Now, the good news and the bad news is that there are as many types of alternative leads as there are writers, as there are fact sets, as there are opportunities. If we put 20 writers in a room and gave them the same story, you'd probably come out with 10 very different types of alternative leads, and the other 10 would be creative versions probably of those. So you'd end up with 20 actually. So that's the good news and the bad news. For those of you who want a really cut and dried way to do this, writing a story like this requires some thinking on your part, a little bit of creativity on your part. But in the end, once you get used to it, you'll have a lot of fun. Now let's review a straight news lead. So we'll look at a story telling the same thing. We'll use it, those facts with straight news lead, and then we'll write an alternative story with those. So a Smallville man escaped injury Saturday after plunging over Wahilo Falls in a kayak. So that's your straight news lead. It's delay ID. We don't know who the guy is. We know what happened to him and where he was and when it happened. And here's the second paragraph where we find out who he is, we find out how old he is, and then we have a little bit more info, and we have a really good partial quote. Now, I know that partial quotes, I told you not to go that direction. Every once in a while, you have something really good like this that is partial quote worthy. Now, let's look at the same information. We're going to write an alternative lead here. A wild ride wasn't on Lance Boyle's to-do list when he started his vacation Saturday at Wahilo Falls State Park. We don't know who Lance Boyle is. We don't know what the wild ride is, right? We don't know a lot of stuff. But we'll find out in the nut graph, and that's where we find out what the story is about. So we have his name, again, and his age and his hometown, and we find out that he escaped injury. He was taking a selfie, right? And we still have that great partial quote in there, but we basically know what happened. And then we can go on and find out the rest of the story. Now, the nut graph is that puzzle piece that you have to have in every story, no matter how long or how short it is. If your feature is 3 paragraphs long, your alternative lead will be 1. Your nut graph will be another, and then you can have a 3rd paragraph. But you absolutely have to have this. So the nut graph serves the same function as a news lead. So it states the central point of the story. So it's going to tell us what the story is about. Why am I invited to read the story? Who are my who's? Finish talking about the what. So I know I can enjoy the rest of the story now because I know what the story is about. It also provides a transition to the general issue, the general problem, the general story. And it explains why the topic is important. So here's an example of an alternative lead. If you want to live longer, have another beer. Now I'm talking to my audience, which I can do in a story like this, but what is a story about? Now, why should I drink beer if I want to live longer? So now I need to know what the story is about. So here's my lead, and here's the story. Researchers found that beer has some stuff in it that can help you. And that's the story. That's why that alternative lead is going to cause me to keep going, at least to read this part. Now let's look at a few different types of alternative leads. Again, I'm going to give you some examples. You can put those in your toolbox. Often you can use variations of these or combinations of these, or even go in your own direction, what you think would work well for a story. But a buried lead is when we're really not clear what the topic is. So the most valuable consumers in the apparel business right now are people who carry no cash, have no credit cards, and often spill milk on their new clothes. Now the thing I like about this is if I'm going to write it, I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint as to who our person might be. And you might even guess, right, that they're small children. You can do some other things here. I think it's fun to play that game with your audience. But here's the nut graph. So now we're finding out that the most valuable consumers are infants and toddlers, So when other clothing is not selling, that means all their grandmas, right, are going out and buying them clothes. Another good type of lead is an anecdote. So, an anecdote is a little tiny story that has a definite beginning, a definite middle, and a definite end. Now, this is a lead, but that tells me that the story is quite long because the length of your lead should match the length of your story. So, go ahead and read this. Stop the video, go ahead and read this, and then we'll talk about it for a minute. So this anecdote is about Richard Leakey, who was a famous archaeologist, and it talks about how he really got started in the business when he was a child, right? It's a simple story, and it has a beginning, middle, and end. It can almost stand on its own. So an anecdote is a lot of things. An anecdote might be how your parents met. An anecdote is how you decided you wanted to take a media writing course. An anecdote is the time that you won your first prize in school. There's so many little stories like that that you can put at the top of a story. And again, it depends on the information that you get from your people that you interview. You're really limited to what information you have. You can't make up anything. Remember, this is what you get from your feature subject. Now, Roundup leads are a lot of fun because they're a collection of related topics in a lead. Somehow they're all related, but we don't really know the relation right until we get on into the story. So take a look at this. If you notice, it's all things that you would consider vices, right? Gamblers get more choices, smokers inhale cheaper cigarettes, and tipplers, those are people who drink, can hoist around to Oregon lawmakers who kept state alcohol taxes among the lowest in the nation. So all of these things are things that you probably shouldn't do because they're not healthy. But why are we talking about this, right? Well, even gluttons came out okay. And so this is about the legislative session. And I like it because a lot of times these sessions can be quite boring. But what the writer did was the writer started to notice how all of these vices were getting passed, were favorably voted upon. And so what can we do for the story there? And so this is a great quote here. Sin had a fabulous session, right? And so that's a Roundup lead. Here's another Roundup lead. So see if you can guess what these people have in common. Now, if you saw an older picture of Sherlock Holmes, then you might see this in the picture. If you saw a picture of Hugh Hefner, I think you might see it. Douglas MacArthur was a World War II general. You would absolutely see this, right? Popeye the Sailor, when he got all excited or upset or energetic, this particular object would spin around, right? So it's about pipes. And so what I like here is the author put a group of people together who really have a lot of. Hugh Hefner is not the same as Gerald Ford, is not the same as Popeye. And if I were writing this, I think I would throw a woman in there just to kind of mix it up a little bit. Some former first ladies back in the day like to smoke pipes. So that's a fun lead when you have groups of things that go together, but that when you first take a look at it, maybe they don't have much in common except one thing. So suspenseful leads are kind of like blind leads, except we are going to do 180, right? It's difficult to run a successful business when you keep losing half of your workforce year after year. So, but I would not put that with beekeeping, right? But if you're a beekeeper, your bees are your employees, right? So it makes sense there, but it's suspenseful in that we would not really guess that. Now, some stories are shocking, right? They just are. And so this would work for it, right? Every night when Twinetta Jones puts her 1-year-old son, Terry Jr., to bed, she has to stuff cotton balls in his ears. It keeps the cockroaches from crawling in them. Now we don't have the nut graph here, right? But it's shocking because it's shocking. And so I did want to show you that's right there. That is a dateline, the name of the city where the story occurs. You see that sometimes in wire service stories, so I wanted to show you that so you'd see what it looks like. I'm not going to put the where in the story because it tells me right here. Now here's another shocker. Now all these things are based on true events, right? And so it works. You know, a shocking story is going to have a shocking lead. So before Toma Petre's relatives pulled his body from the grave, ripped out his heart, burned it to ashes, mixed it with water, and drank it, he hadn't been in the news much. That's often the way it is with vampires here in Romania. Quiet lives, active deaths. Okay, so now we need to find out, right, what's going on here. So here's the rest of the story. It's really about a vampire slaying, right? It's a bit of national heritage, but it's illegal. And so we still need a little bit more. We need a nut graph that gives us a little bit of how all these relationships happen. But this group of people wanted to make sure that this guy was really dead because they didn't want to be followed around by a vampire if he were to be one, right? So they thought they were doing the right thing. So it's shocking. We have a shocking lead because it's a shocking story. Now these are fun too. A direct address lead allows you to talk to your audience and use the second person pronoun you in the lead. So here's a story where you talk to the audience, right? So go ahead and read that. So the author's talking to the audience, talking to the reader. Now, once I finish the lead, this would be the lead, then I would switch into third person and tell the story because it's going to be a lot easier to do that once you establish your lead. But this is kind of a situation that might occur. It might be something that people have experienced. And so talk to your audience. It's okay to do in a story like this. Now, those of you who are cheesy by nature, right, this is where you get a chance to shine. You get a chance to use puns. You get a chance to use fun words. So in Michael Crichton's previous novel, Jurassic Park, a tropical island has been transformed into a zoo whose denizens are dinosaurs brought to life by a group of greedy, irresponsible scientists who have been cloning around. Right? So we get all the way to the end, and it should be clowning around, right? But the author is having a fun with some words, having a play on words. James J. Sanders beat them, and now he wants to join them. So you can take a pun or some kind of saying that people do, but twist it around a little bit, right? You don't want to use it as is. You want to have some creativity there. Now remember, I told you, you pretty much can try anything for a lead like this. I love this because it's so different. I wanted to show it to you. Now, we don't have the nut graph. I don't know why Buster Finkle has teeth shaped like giant U's, right? Where they should be shaped like these. But we will find that story out. But it makes me want to find out, right? Get to the nut graph and find out what's going on here. Now, if you're going to use a cliche or a pun, I would say that you change them in some way. So here's an example. When life handed Jane Jones lemons, she made lemon chiffon cupcakes. So we usually say when life hands you lemons, make lemonade. But maybe the story's about Jane, who's had some difficulties and she's turned it around. Now she's taken those lemons and made lemonade. But I'm not going to do that, right? I'm going to switch those things around a little bit more, and I'm going to have some fun with it, but I'm not going to keep it the same way. Now, this is not a great copy here, but I wanted to show you. Sorry, it's a little bit crooked. I copied this from a magazine. It's a story. It's enough to bring tears or milk to your eyes, right? So there's my lead. In the second paragraph, I'm going to have the nut graph. So why am I saying that? It's about a worker who poured milk into his hand snorted it up his nose, and squirted it 9.2 feet out of his left eye. Right, in hopes he would be recognized as a new world record. Now, there's so much to this story I want to know. Like, when in the world did he discover that he could squirt milk out of his eye, right? So he must have been the most popular second grader in his school. That's all I say. Now, look, right next to that, right after that, we get to hear from him, right? We get to hear what he thinks about it. Now, I wanted to show you, so we have our quote, but we're not following the quote speaker verb rule because we have a little bit of description after his name. So we said Ilker Yilmaz, 28, who's able to perform an unusual feat because of an anomaly in his tear gland. Because we have so much going on after his name, we're going to flip that said and put it before his name. And then at the end, we find out, that the Guinness Book of World Records is going to verify this and kind of what's going on. It's a bright, so we really don't have an ending to it. But I wanted to show you this because I like a lot of things about this. I like the lead. I like the nut graph. I like having that quote right after the nut graph. We have all the context that we need and we can enjoy his statement. So these are some examples now we've seen of alternative leads. It's going to help put some things in your toolbox so that you can pull some out. Again, they're way more than this, but these, and you can also use some combinations of these, but this is a lot to get you started on your feature writing career.